This is St. Helena, a tiny speck hidden deep within the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the nearest continent. A place so remote that for centuries reaching it meant crossing an enormous stretch of empty ocean with nothing but waves, wind, and endless blue surrounding you. From the sea, St. Helena does not look welcoming. Dark volcanic cliffs rise dramatically from the water, forming walls hundreds of meters high, while narrow valleys disappear into the mountains beyond. It almost looks as though the island was built to keep people out. But behind those towering cliffs lies a world that is completely different from what its harsh exterior suggests. A world of mist-covered forests, green mountains, tiny villages, historic streets, rare wildlife, and a community that has learned to build an entire way of life around isolation. This is also the island where one of history's most powerful men spent the final years of his life. Napoleon Bonaparte was sent here after his defeat, not because St. Helena had enormous prisons or impenetrable walls, but because the ocean itself was considered a prison strong enough to hold him. Today, however, the same distance that once made St. Helena a place of exile has become one of its greatest attractions. People travel thousands of kilometers to experience a place where life moves differently, where neighbors know one another, where the ocean still determines the rhythm of everyday life, and where history seems to remain quietly present around every corner. So how did people learn to live on an island this isolated? And what is daily life really like in one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth? To understand St. Helena, we first have to understand just how far away it really is. From the island, the coast of Africa lies nearly 2,000 kilometers away. South America is more than 3,000 kilometers across the ocean, and the United Kingdom, the territory to which St. Helena belongs, is thousands of kilometers farther still. Even Ascension Island, one of its closest neighbors, is more than 1,000 kilometers away. On a map, these numbers may seem like nothing more than measurements. But on St. Helena, distance becomes something you can actually feel. It determines how food arrives. It affects the cost of living. It influences medical care, education, employment, travel, and even the way people think about time. For generations, the ocean was not something you crossed casually. It was a barrier. A journey to the outside world could take days by ship, and bad weather could delay that journey even longer. For much of its history, St. Helena existed almost like a world separated from the rest of the planet, and yet somehow a community grew here, a community that today calls itself the Saints. St. Helena covers only about 120 square kilometers, but its small size hides an extraordinary variety of landscapes. The island is volcanic in origin, formed millions of years ago as lava rose from the depths of the South Atlantic. Its coastline is dominated by cliffs, some rising dramatically above the ocean. Waves constantly strike their bases, while seabirds circle overhead and wind moves across the exposed rock. Approaching from the sea, it is easy to understand why this place once seemed almost impossible to reach. There are no endless beaches welcoming ships. There is no broad coastal plain where a large city could spread. Instead, the island rises sharply from the ocean, its mountains and valleys creating a natural fortress. But once you travel inland, something remarkable begins to happen. The landscape changes, and it changes quickly. Dry, windswept areas can give way to green hills. Green hills become mist-covered slopes, and higher into the mountains, the air becomes cooler and wetter, creating an environment that feels completely disconnected from the ocean cliffs below. At the heart of this transformation is Diana's Peak, the highest point on the island. Here, clouds frequently gather around the mountains. Moisture carried inland by the trade winds condenses in the vegetation, creating a remarkable natural water system. Plants capture droplets from the mist. The forest holds moisture, and streams carry water down toward the lower parts of the island, in a place where fresh water cannot simply be taken for granted. This natural system has been essential to life. The highlands are also home to some of St. Helena's most extraordinary natural environments. For millions of years, the island developed in isolation. Plants and animals evolved here under conditions unlike almost anywhere else. Some species became unique to St. Helena. The forests contain ancient forms of vegetation, including tree ferns and native plants that survived enormous changes in climate and human activity. Walking through the highlands can feel strangely peaceful. Mist moves slowly between the trees. Water gathers on leaves. The wind becomes softer beneath the canopy, and for a moment the modern world seems very far away. But St. Helena's isolation also made its wildlife extremely vulnerable. When humans eventually arrived, they brought animals, plants, and species that had never existed on the island before. Goats, cattle, crops, and invasive plants changed the landscape. Some native species disappeared. Others survived only in small, protected areas. Among the island's most famous survivors is the wire bird, also known as the St. Helena plover. It is the island's national bird and one of its most recognizable symbols, small and delicate in appearance. It has survived despite centuries of environmental pressure. Today, protecting creatures like the wire bird is part of a much larger effort to restore St. Helena's natural environment. Because this island is not simply a place where nature survived. It is also a place where people changed nature dramatically and are now trying to repair some of what was lost. But the story of St. Helena did not begin with people. For millions of years, the island existed without permanent human settlement. There were no roads, no houses, no farms, no harbor, only volcanic mountains, forests, cliffs, seabirds, and the endless ocean. Then, in 1502, a Portuguese expedition encountered the island. The appearance of land after months at sea must have been extraordinary. After traveling across an immense ocean, a green volcanic island rising from the horizon would have seemed almost like a miracle. The island was named St. Helena, associated with St. Helena. For a long time, however, its location was treated as a valuable secret. Ships traveling between Europe and Asia could use the island as a stopping point. Fresh water could be collected, food could be grown, animals could be left to reproduce, plants could be introduced, and slowly an isolated volcanic island began to become a strategic point in the middle of the ocean. By the 17th century, the island entered a new chapter. The English East India Company established a permanent settlement. Jamestown grew inside a narrow valley, squeezed between steep cliffs, and even today, the geography of Jamestown immediately reveals how difficult it must have been to build a town here. There simply is not much flat land. The valley is narrow. The mountains rise sharply around it. Houses, roads, shops, churches, government buildings, and public spaces all have to fit into this confined landscape. The result is one of the most unusual capital towns in the world. Jamestown does not spread endlessly outward. Instead, it is concentrated within its valley, while roads climb upward into the surrounding hills. Historic buildings line the streets. Stone walls preserve the appearance of another era. And narrow roads follow the shape of the valley rather than forcing the landscape to follow the needs of the city. The town feels less like a modern capital and more like a historic settlement that has somehow remained alive. But St. Helena's history would soon become connected to one of the most famous names in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte. After his defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Napoleon was sent into exile. The British needed a place from which escape would be extraordinarily difficult. St. Helena was almost perfect. There was no need for enormous prison walls. The Atlantic Ocean was the wall. Thousands of kilometers of water separated Napoleon from Europe. The journey itself was dangerous and difficult, and there was nowhere nearby to disappear. Napoleon spent the final years of his life at Longwood House on the island's high plateau. The landscape around him was very different from the grand palaces and battlefields of Europe. Instead of armies and royal courts, there were windswept hills, mist, grasslands, and the distant ocean. The man who had once controlled much of Europe now lived under constant observation on a remote island. He died here in 1821. His remains were eventually returned to France, but St. Helena never lost its association with him. Longwood House remains one of the island's most important historical sites. Visitors can walk through the rooms where Napoleon spent his final years and stand in the same landscape that once surrounded his exile. But Napoleon is only one chapter in the history of St. Helena. The island also became connected to one of the darkest chapters in human history. During the 19th century, British ships brought thousands of Africans rescued from illegal slave ships to St. Helena. Many arrived exhausted after terrible journeys across the Atlantic. The island became a place of rescue, recovery, and death for people who had endured unimaginable conditions. Their stories form another important layer of St. Helena's history. Later, prisoners of war were also brought to the island. Again, the same geographical isolation that had made St. Helena useful as a trading station made it useful as a place of confinement. The island became a strange crossroads of human history. Sailors came, merchants came, soldiers came, enslaved people and rescued Africans came, prisoners came, and eventually families stayed over generations. People from different parts of the world became part of the same small island society. British ancestry mixed with African, Asian, and other influences. Different traditions became intertwined. And from this history emerged the people known as saints. Today, St. Helena is not simply a British outpost in the South Atlantic. It has its own identity, its own community, its own traditions, and its own way of speaking. That identity becomes especially visible when you leave the historic sites and simply watch ordinary life. Because perhaps the most fascinating thing about St. Helena is not Napoleon. It is not the cliffs. It is not the forests. It is the ordinary day. Dawn arrives quietly over Jamestown. The first sunlight reaches the rooftops and slowly illuminates the steep walls of the valley. Doors open. People step outside. Cars begin moving along the narrow streets. And because the population is so small, familiar faces appear almost everywhere. A shopkeeper knows the customers. Neighbors recognize one another. Children walk through the streets on their way to school. A short conversation can easily become a long one because there is little need to rush. This is one of the defining characteristics of island life. People have learned to live with limited space and limited resources, but they have also developed a strong sense of community on the mainland. It is possible to disappear into a crowd. On St. Helena, there is hardly a crowd to disappear into. People notice one another. They know families. They remember stories. They often know where someone comes from and who their relatives are. For some people, that closeness can feel comforting. For others, it can feel like there is very little privacy. But either way, it shapes the character of the island. Life here is intensely local, and the geography reinforces that feeling. A home may sit on a hillside overlooking the sea. Another may be tucked into a valley. Others are scattered across higher settlements where the air is cooler and the landscape greener. There is no single image of a St. Helena home. Instead, houses adapt to the terrain. Some are surrounded by gardens, some face steep hills, some look toward the ocean, and many are built in places where every meter of usable land matters. The landscape determines where people can live. It determines where roads can go, and it determines how people move around the island. Perhaps nowhere is this more obvious than Jacob's Ladder. This famous staircase connects Jamestown with the settlement of Half Tree Hollow. It contains hundreds of steps rising steeply up the side of the valley. Climbing it is not simply a tourist activity for generations. These steps have been part of the daily movement of people on the island. The first few steps may seem easy, but as the staircase continues upward, the slope becomes increasingly demanding. Breathing becomes heavier, the valley drops farther below, and the ocean appears wider with every step. Yet for local people, the extraordinary becomes ordinary. A landscape that looks extreme to a visitor can simply be part of someone's route home. The same is true of the island's roads. Some wind around mountainsides with steep drops below. Drivers have learned to move carefully, patiently, and respectfully. There is little room for aggressive driving when the road itself demands attention, and that sense of patience extends beyond transportation. St. Helena has a phrase that captures this attitude particularly well: island time. It does not necessarily mean that people do nothing. It means that life is shaped by circumstances that cannot always be controlled. A ship may be delayed, a flight may change, weather may interrupt plans, a delivery may arrive later than expected. And when those things happen, there is often little anyone can do except adapt. This is one of the deepest lessons of remote island life. You cannot order the ocean to become calm. You cannot command the wind to stop. You cannot force a ship to arrive through dangerous seas. So instead, you learn to wait, and waiting becomes part of everyday life. The ocean is also one of the most important parts of St. Helena's economy. For generations, fishing has connected families directly to the sea. Local fishermen continue to use pole and line methods, particularly for tuna. The process is simple compared with industrial fishing. A boat goes out, fishermen watch the water. When tuna appear, lines are cast, the fish are brought aboard individually, and the boat eventually returns with its catch. The ocean that makes life difficult is also the ocean that provides food and income. This contradiction defines St. Helena. The sea separates the island from the world, but it also sustains the island. It is both barrier and resource, both prison and livelihood, both distance and connection. Fishing is not the only way people make use of the island's land. In the highlands, agriculture remains important. Gardens provide vegetables, livestock graze on green pastures. And among the island's agricultural products, one has become especially famous: coffee. St. Helena's coffee has a remarkable history. Coffee plants were introduced to the island centuries ago, and a particular variety became associated with St. Helena. Because production is small and cultivation is difficult, the coffee is considered a rare specialty. Trees grow on the hillsides. Farmers carefully harvest the cherries. Much of the work is done on a small scale. There is no enormous agricultural landscape stretching toward the horizon. Instead, farming on St. Helena is about making use of limited land. Every garden matters. Every field matters. Every successful harvest provides another degree of independence from supplies arriving from overseas. And that independence matters because almost everything that cannot be produced locally must travel a very long way. Imagine going to a supermarket, knowing that the next major shipment is separated from you by thousands of kilometers of ocean. A delay is not simply inconvenient, it can affect what is available on the shelves. Fresh produce may become scarce. Certain products may disappear temporarily. Fuel and construction materials must travel long distances. Medical supplies depend on transportation links. And because shipping is expensive, the cost of living can be high. This is the hidden price of isolation. From a distance, isolation can look romantic. It can look peaceful. It can look like freedom from the noise and stress of modern cities. But living with isolation is very different from visiting it. When you need something urgently, the nearest major city is not a short drive away. When a family member needs specialized medical care, leaving the island may be necessary. When a young person wants to study a subject that is not available locally, they may have to travel overseas. And when young people leave for education or employment, the island faces another challenge: population. With only a few thousand residents, St. Helena has a very small workforce. There are only so many jobs, only so many businesses, only so many specialists. The island needs teachers, medical workers, engineers, tradespeople, public servants, business owners, and many others. But a small population cannot easily provide every skill internally. That creates a difficult balance. The island needs greater connection with the outside world, but greater connection can also make it easier for young people to leave. This is one of the great questions facing St. Helena today. How do you connect with the world without losing what makes your home unique? For centuries, the answer was almost impossible. There was very little choice. The island was isolated because transportation was difficult. But in 2016, something changed. St. Helena Airport officially opened. For the first time, regular air travel created a much faster connection with the outside world. The island was no longer dependent entirely on ships for passenger travel. A journey that once required many days at sea could now be completed much more quickly by air. But even the airport reflects St. Helena's geography. The runway was built in an extremely challenging location. Wind conditions can make landings difficult. The surrounding landscape and ocean create conditions that demand careful aviation. So even modern technology has had to adapt to the island rather than simply replacing its geography. The airport also opened a new chapter for tourism. Visitors began arriving more easily. Guest houses developed. Restaurants and cafes gained new customers. Local guides found opportunities. Residents could share the history and landscapes of their home with people from around the world. And suddenly, the island's greatest weakness became one of its greatest attractions. Distance itself became part of the experience. Travelers were not coming despite St. Helena's remoteness. They were coming because of it. They wanted to see a place that still felt different, a place where there were no enormous crowds, a place where history had not been buried beneath skyscrapers, a place where the night sky remained remarkably dark. And perhaps most importantly, a place where nature still dominates the landscape. One of the most remarkable animals visitors can encounter here is Jonathan, the giant tortoise. For generations, Jonathan has lived on St. Helena. His age is extraordinary. He is believed to have been born in the 19th century, making him one of the oldest known living land animals on Earth. Think about what that means. Jonathan has lived through generations of human history. He was alive before modern aviation, before television, before the internet, before the island had an airport. He has watched transportation change from ships to aircraft. He has witnessed countless generations of people grow up, leave, and return. And yet his world remains remarkably simple: grass, sunlight, stone walls, and the quiet rhythm of the island. Standing near an animal that has lived for so long creates a strange sense of perspective. Human lives feel short. Political events come and go. Technology changes. Cities transform. But Jonathan continues to move slowly across the grass. St. Helena also offers another extraordinary experience beneath the ocean. The waters surrounding the island are known for their marine life, including whale sharks during the appropriate season. These enormous animals can be encountered in the clear waters around the island. A whale shark is the largest fish in the world. Yet despite its enormous size, it moves through the water with a quiet, almost peaceful rhythm. For visitors swimming nearby, the experience can feel surreal. There is no aquarium glass, no artificial enclosure, only open ocean. Sunlight passes through the water. The animal moves slowly beneath you, and the realization arrives that you are sharing the same space with one of the largest creatures on Earth. Above the water, St. Helena offers another kind of spectacle: the night sky. Because the island is so remote and has relatively little artificial light, darkness arrives with extraordinary clarity. Far away from the glow of major cities, the Milky Way can become visible across the sky. Stars appear in numbers that many people living in large urban areas rarely experience. The same isolation that makes supplies expensive creates a completely different kind of wealth: darkness, silence, space, and a view of the universe that feels almost untouched. But St. Helena is not frozen in the past. Its people celebrate. They gather. They create music. They organize festivals. They preserve traditions. And one of the most important celebrations is St. Helena's Day, held on May 21st. The day connects the modern community with the island's history. Streets become more lively. People gather. Music fills Jamestown. Families participate. Children watch performances. And saints living overseas may return home for the celebration. That final part is particularly meaningful. For a community scattered across the world, coming home is not simply a journey. It is a return to identity. An airport arrival can become a family reunion. A hug at the arrival's gate can represent months or years of separation. The island may be remote, but its people do not necessarily stop belonging to it when they leave. Home can remain connected to a landscape thousands of kilometers away. Other celebrations bring their own energy. Parades fill the streets. Children dress in costumes. Families decorate floats. Christmas lights transform the narrow streets. And even small traditions can become important because, on an island, this small community events have a way of bringing almost everyone together. Food is another part of that identity. St. Helena's cuisine reflects the island's history. Different cultures arrived here over centuries, and their influences became part of local cooking. One traditional dish is plo, a rice-based meal prepared with meat and spices. Its history reflects the connections between St. Helena and the roots of the East India Company. The ocean also remains present at the dinner table. Fresh tuna can be grilled, prepared with potatoes and spices, or turned into fish cakes. Food here is not simply about taste. It carries memory. A recipe can tell the story of a ship. A spice can reveal an old trade route. A dish can preserve the influence of a community that arrived generations ago. And this is perhaps what makes St. Helena so fascinating. Almost everything has a story behind it. A staircase is not simply a staircase. It is a response to geography. A coffee plant is not simply a crop. It is a remnant of centuries of global trade. A historic house is not simply an old building. It is a reminder of exile. A festival is not simply entertainment. It is a way of keeping community alive. And the ocean is not simply scenery. It is the force that has shaped almost every part of life here. For centuries, that ocean kept St. Helena distant. Today, aircraft and the internet have weakened that distance. People can communicate with family around the world. Visitors can arrive more easily. Local businesses can reach customers beyond the island. Young people have greater access to education and information. But connection brings a difficult question. What happens when a place built around isolation becomes increasingly connected? Modernization can improve life. It can create opportunities. It can make healthcare and education more accessible. It can bring tourism and income. But it can also change the character of a community. More visitors mean more pressure on infrastructure. More outside influence can change traditions. Greater access to the world can make leaving easier. And a small island has limited space to absorb rapid change. So St. Helena now stands between two worlds. One is the old island, slow, remote, self-reliant, dependent on ships, and shaped by the ocean. The other is the emerging island, connected by aircraft, connected by the internet. Open to visitors, linked to global markets. Neither world can completely disappear. And perhaps the future of St. Helena will depend on finding a balance between them. Because the greatest treasure here may not be something that can be exported. It may be the island's sense of identity, a place where people still recognize one another in the street, where community traditions remain important, where the landscape still determines the shape of daily life, where nature is not something far away from the city, but something surrounding it at every moment, and where history is not locked inside a museum. It remains visible in the streets, the buildings, the mountains, and the stories people tell. When evening arrives in Jamestown, the steep valley begins to darken. The last sunlight disappears from the cliffs. Lights slowly appear in windows. Cars become less frequent. The streets grow quiet. Far below, waves continue to strike the coast. The ocean remains exactly where it has always been, stretching thousands of kilometers in every direction. And perhaps this is when St. Helena makes the most sense. Not during the arrival of a ship. Not while standing inside a famous historic house. Not even while watching a whale shark beneath the surface. But in the quiet moments when ordinary life continues despite the enormous distance surrounding the island. A family eating dinner, a neighbor greeting another neighbor, a fisherman preparing for the next morning, a child returning home from school, a farmer working on a hillside, a light glowing inside a small house above the valley. These moments may seem insignificant, but together they explain how a tiny volcanic island became home to generations of people. St. Helena was once described through the eyes of outsiders, a strategic station, a remote possession, a place of exile, a prison without walls, a stopping point in the middle of the Atlantic. But today, the island can be understood differently. It is a home built by people who arrived from different parts of the world and over generations created something uniquely their own. It is a place where isolation did not completely separate people. Instead, it forced them to depend on one another. Where distance did not erase identity, it strengthened it. And where the harshness of the landscape did not drive people away forever, it taught them how to adapt. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of St. Helena. The island did not conquer its isolation. It learned to live with it. The cliffs remain. The ocean remains. The winds continue to move across the mountains. Ships still have to cross enormous distances. Supplies still depend on weather. Young people still face the decision of whether to stay or leave, and the world outside continues to move faster and faster. But here inside this tiny piece of land in the South Atlantic, another rhythm survives, a slower rhythm. A rhythm built around community, around patience, around history, around the ocean, and around the simple understanding that a home does not have to be large, convenient, or close to the rest of the world to become deeply meaningful. For Napoleon, St. Helena was the end of an empire. For sailors, it was once a distant refuge. For thousands of people brought here by history, it became a place of survival and memory. And for the saints who call it home, it is something much simpler. It is where life happens, where families grow, where traditions are passed from one generation to the next, where the mountains overlook the sea, and where, every morning, another ordinary day begins on one of the most extraordinary islands on Earth. Far out in the South Atlantic, surrounded by thousands of kilometers of empty ocean, St. Helena continues to stand quietly against the horizon, small, remote, ancient, and remarkably alive. A place that once seemed forgotten by the world has become a reminder that even in the most isolated corners of the planet, people can create community, preserve identity, and turn a harsh landscape into home. And perhaps that is why, after leaving St. Helena, the thing that stays with you is not simply the image of its cliffs or the story of Napoleon. It is the feeling of a place where distance has never completely meant separation, where isolation has become part of identity, and where beneath the vast South Atlantic sky, a small community continues to live at its own quiet rhythm, a rhythm that has survived centuries of change and may continue long after the waves have erased every footprint from the shore.